marches, fighting for constitutional principles, for your liberty, for my liberty, and for a different future for his children and his grandchildren. But he hasn't been in that fight alone. There's been a faithful woman who stands beside him, who's made equal sacrifices to what he's made. I guarantee you Carol's knocked on more doors. She's stuffed more envelopes. We all think we've done a lot. But over all these years, Carol Paul has been a faithful wife and a lover of liberty, just like her husband. It often occurred to me over this campaign as I watched the two of them tirelessly travel all around this country to build hope and encouragement in each one of you. What a sacrifice they have made. You know, most people, after they've had a long career like this, retire and enjoy that retirement. But instead, Ron and Carol Paul have sacrificed their retirement for our liberty. And Carol's been right there with him. It didn't matter whether people were vilifying him. She stood faithful. She stood up to what many other women would have fallen away from. She was ready to stand with her husband no matter what lies were told about him, what the media had to say about him, because just like Ron, she believed in liberty and she wanted to leave something greater to her children and to her grandchildren. So I thought it would be most unfitting if tonight we didn't honor the sacrifices that Carol Paul made. We didn't call her out here and we let her know how much we love her, how much we appreciate her.
Here I thought we were just moving things along to get Ron up here. I didn't know you've all been waiting for him. But my job was to introduce the family, because that's what I usually do best. You know, those family things? Okay. So first of all, I do want to thank you all for coming. We couldn't do what we've done without you. And it's only the beginning. And we are the future. Okay, I have some family here that I want to introduce. I'm going to bring them all out on the stage. And they don't listen to directions. They're not doing it in order. All right. On this side, our oldest son Ronnie and his wife Peggy, and he has two of his three daughters with him today. Lisa, who's a medical student, and Linda, who's a senior at A&M. And their older daughter is a resident doctor, and she couldn't leave her station, so she's not here today. Our next, our daughter Lori and her husband Tom. Lori has 5 children. Lori's oldest son Matt is assistant principal at a elementary school, and he couldn't make it here today, but his sister Vicki is here. Vicki is married to Christopher White, and they have 2 children. Paul. His wife Kelly is with him, and they have 3 sons. William, who's a sophomore in college, Duncan, who's busy playing soccer. They couldn't be here, but their youngest son, Robert, was with them today. Then our number 4 child, Robert Paul, Dr. Robert Paul. Robert's wife, Monica, couldn't be here because they have kids who are busy in sports, playing soccer and all kind of things that had to be played this weekend. And our youngest daughter, Joy, is just a few weeks away from delivering our 19th grandchild. So her doctor didn't want her to come. Oh, okay, wait, okay. I've already made a mistake. We have to back up to number 2 child, Lori. I only told about 3 of her kids. She has 2 more. Mark Hyatt is here. Mark is a junior at the University of Houston, and his younger brother Michael is playing for the Houston Cougars baseball, and so they wouldn't let him off. He had to do some training. All right. Our youngest daughter, Joy, who couldn't come, sent one of her twins to be here. But because this storm decided to come in, they whisked him away and he's on an airplane back to Texas. So let's see. Have I done it all? Thanks for putting up with all the history. It gives me a great honor to present our middle child, Senator Dr. Rand Paul. He will introduce his dad. And I would like to tell you,
now you guys are lucky we only brought half the family. If the whole family would be here for another hour. I want to thank you for supporting my dad and also for supporting the cause of liberty and not letting our founding principles die. Anybody here in favor of abolishing the TSA? You know, when I say that in Washington, they say, what are you complaining about? You can go to the airport, and if you don't have health insurance, you can get a free breast exam. You can get a free mammogram, and if you mention the Ron Paul Revolution, you can get a free colonoscopy. The only problem is some of us would prefer that our physician not be selected by advertising that's on the Pizza Hut box. I had the director of TSA come before my committee, and he said, well, we've got to pat down these children. And I showed him a picture of a 6-year-old girl from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and the agent had her hands inside this little girl's pants. And he said to me in all seriousness, and he followed up with a letter, and he said, well, a girl in Kandahar set off a bomb, an 8-year-old girl. And I said, this girl's not from Kandahar. She's from Bowling Green, Kentucky. There's a professor at Harvard, and he wrote recently, his name's Noah Feldman, he wrote, the next time the TSA asks you to put your hands above your head, no, hun, just a little bit higher. No, hun, a little bit higher. And when you stand there for a vulnerable 7 seconds, the next time you do this, you ask yourself, is this the pose of a free man? We have had the beginnings of some great victories, but we have yet to have the great victories. We did have a great victory in the House when we passed Audit the Fed. This is a credit to a certain congressman from Texas who got every Republican to vote for it and 100 Democrats to vote for it. A lot of news reports are saying it's dead now and it's going nowhere, and I can tell you that's not true. We have 29 co-sponsors in the Senate. I've sat down personally with Harry Reid twice, and Harry Reid assures me that he's been for Audit the Fed for over 20 years. Don't laugh. We found the YouTube videos. From 1987 on, Harry Reid has been for Audit the Fed. He's just not sure if he's still for it. But this is something we can do. When I go back in September, we're going to try to get a vote. Harry Reid is the only one that can allow me to have the vote. He has all the power. If everyone in this room convinces 100 other people to email Harry Reid and says, we want to vote on Audit the Fed, I think we still can get it. So that is for you to do. One of the great things that's come out of Audit the Fed is that people have heard you. They've heard you saying in the Fed too, but they've also heard Audit the Fed. But here's the thing. Because we've talked about Audit the Fed so much, we're now talking about Audit the Pentagon. Now, because of Hurricane Isaac, it's not sure whether my message will get to the Republican National Convention, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to speak. But one of the messages that I will give to them is that Republicans need to acknowledge that not every dollar is well spent or sacred in the military, and we have to look for waste in every department of government. A lot of you have been involved in my dad's presidential campaign in 2008 and 2012. It's been a marvelous ride that none of us will ever forget. But there are three things that stick out in my mind and to me are so incredible that they were ever spoken at all on a national stage. The first one, and the one I'll never forget, and this is something Republicans need to hearken to and Republicans need to understand when they say, why do all these young people love Ron Paul? Why does the internet love Ron Paul? They think it's because he's cool. Well, you know, I'm his kid. I can tell you it's not because he's cool. But the ideas of liberty are cool. And I can tell you one moment that I thought was really cool when he said, you know what? when you read the Beatitudes, when you read the Sermon on the Mount, it doesn't say anywhere in there, blessed are the war makers. What came out of these campaigns was a candidate who said something no one had heard, who said that we can have and should have limited constitutional government, but as part of that message, we should be reluctant to go to war. We should not have a rash foreign policy. We should be careful. Another moment they originally called the Ron Paul moment was when he talked about blowback. Had he not talked about blowback, I don't think anyone ever would have. And the one thing that people still fail to grasp, so many fail to grasp, is they say, well, that's what your enemies are saying. Well, if you want to know why your enemies attack you, it doesn't justify why they attacked you. It doesn't justify any attacks. But if you want to understand what's going on, you would have to know why they say they attacked you. The final, and I know there are hundreds of moments, but the final moment that was one of my favorite, and I think this was from 2008 also, when they talked about the war in Iraq, and he said, you know what? We just marched in, and we can just march out. I give to you the guy that is my hero, the guy that is the greatest representative of the liberty movement in our time, my father, Ron Paul. Much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thanks. Thank you. So nice. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Enough. That's very nice, very nice, very nice. Thank you very much. Is there anything left for me to say? Oh, this is wonderful. It's wonderful to be among friends with my family, and for a good reason, to promote the cause of liberty in a revolutionary spirit. Thank you very much for being here. I have to tell you, though, I was pretty worried the early part of this week.
saw a couple of bad articles. It wasn't the hurricane that I was worried about, but I saw that it said, revolution is over. There's going to be no revolution. Major paper in Washington, D.C., they said, the revolution will not be happening. Don't they only wish? But it is so great to come together for something so important. You know, a lot of people say today is a very important day, and I think it is. Our events today, to me, very important. And they say that this convention, very important this week, and indeed it is. And this election is very important. But let me tell you, there's something even more important than all of that, and that is the cause that we're leading and the cause of liberty, the ascension that we're getting right now. There's been a lot of talk about whether or not I would get to speak at the convention. And, of course, I've written that off. But today, I was very excited. I got a call from the RNC. And they said they changed their mind. And they're going to give me a whole hour. I can say anything I want. Tomorrow night. Just kidding, just kidding. First off, I really want to recognize our delegates, hundreds. I don't know how many, but thank you, thank you. Takes a lot of hard work, and you knew the rules better than they thought they knew the rules. But, you know, that didn't stop them. They've learned how to bend rules, break rules, and now they want to rewrite the rules. But then again, maybe they've been paying attention to what's been going on in Washington. They've been bending the rules and breaking the rules and rewriting the rules for too long. That's what we have to stop from happening. You know, people at the convention were worried just how much trouble we would cause, and you generally have known what my advice is. Just stopping something for the sake of stopping doesn't achieve a whole lot, so I've been a little bit cautious. But what they have found out is they've overstepped the bound. There's a big fight going on, and we're involved in it, but everybody else, a bunch of them are joining us and saying, you've gone too far. The Ron Paul people were right about overstepping their bound. You know, it's just been great, the experience I've had these last 5 years, and it's been a very important time, not only for me personally, but I think for the attention that we're getting. Now, I have received a lot of compliments about it and given some credit about it, but I tell you what, it takes you, it takes a lot of other people. There's been a lot of things going on for decades, and it's coming about. It's coming about. Not so much, not only because I believe we're right on the issues, but what is coming out right now is proof positive that their philosophy of government, whether it's foreign policy, monetary policy, or economic policy, is failing, and they need something different. I have often quoted, Victor Hugo about Samuel Adams, about an irate, tireless minority and bringing about changes in that way. But ultimately, that minority is irate and tireless, and they light the fires of liberty in the minds of men. Yes, that's important, but ultimately, numbers do count. And even numbers do count when they don't count all the votes as well, because we do have the numbers. But those who promote ideas ultimately have to have an influence on the prevailing attitudes of the people. And that is what's happening today. The people now are waking up and they're realizing the failure of what we have and the reason that these ideas are coming about. Now, in this primary, we had close to 2 million votes. They say, oh, yeah, there's 2 million votes. That doesn't swing an election, it's no big deal. But guess what? For every vote that we got in the primary, let me tell you, just from my personal experience of traveling around the country and meeting people at airports and wherever, the support out there is much, much greater, and they don't feel comfortable coming to a Republican primary. So the support there, I would say, be 2 or 3 times as much as the number of votes we got in the primary. We have talked a lot about the excitement that the young people bring, the excitement we've had on the campuses. I asked somebody on the staff after the last campaign event on a college campus, I said, how many campuses did I go to? And let me tell you, if they had told me I was going to go to this number of campuses during the campaign, I probably would have said, there's no way you could do that. We went to 33 college campuses. Talked to close to 150,000 young people, enthusiastic. Were they the conservative college campuses, or were they the liberal college campuses? No, they were all the college campuses. They welcomed us. Now, when you think, if there's a party that says, oh, we have an open tent, we want new people to come in, we want to appeal to the young people, don't you think they would be begging and pleading that they come into the big tent? Well, we'll get into the tent, believe me, because we will become the tent eventually. Once they know we are the future, they will know about this. But the young people certainly have the enthusiasm. And I think it's the enthusiasm that really energizes a campaign. It energizes not only themselves and the college campuses, and I've always maintained there will not be a true revolution unless the college campuses are alive and well with those ideas. But there has been so many times that the young people, not only those of voting age, but sometimes 13 and 14 and 15, they bring their parents to the office and have them converted into believing and understanding about what liberty is all about. Young people energize a lot of other people and give the energy to the remnant who are with us already. So this to me is exciting with the energy that we have. It seems to me that they would be begging and pleading for us to come into the party. You know, most people in this room probably have read that book called 1984. It was required reading in high school for so many years. And, I figured it out. I can explain to you where the problem is. 1984 has been read by a lot. I would assume everybody in this room read it as a dire warning of what could happen to a society if you're not careful. I think a bunch of people read the book and thought it was a business plan, and they ran for Congress. Because so many claim they read it, and they claim that they understand this, and yet they do the very things that we have been fighting against and trying to stop. During the campaign, I got a lot of advice. Can you believe that? A lot of advice. Sometimes from strangers, sometimes from our enemies, sometimes from my family as well. But no, the advice that came up from the very well-meaning individuals who were in the category of maybe mainstream Republican. And they would come up and say, Ron, we really like you. We like what you're doing, and we like what you're saying. But if you would only do one thing, if you would change one thing, boy, you would really have a lot more success. You need to change your foreign policy. And of course, if I didn't have the policy that I do have, I don't believe we would be here tonight. And this is something they obviously do not understand. Those who do understand it fear it because of the powerful special interest behind a foreign policy of intervention in the military-industrial complex. So it's complex, but they strongly resent this. But it was mentioned already today. I have mentioned it before, but I think it's the best test of my support coming from, more so than anybody else, from the military for our foreign policy. The subject of monetary policy, of course, comes up frequently in Washington on our committee, but off and on over quite a few years. And the question has always been, what are we going to do with the penny? You know, they want to change it to steel, but they can't even afford the steel. If you have a steel penny instead, we're off the gold, off the silver, we're off the copper standard, now we're on the zinc standard, we can't even afford a zinc penny, so then now they want to make them out of steel, but the steel, by the time you pay for labor, it costs more than a penny to make a steel penny. So there was an article, a headline came out the other day, it said, can we save the penny? And I got to thinking, well, they don't understand monetary policy or they wouldn't be talking that way. The bigger question that we will be forced to face is, can we save the dollar? There was a bill passed not too long ago, and as you could guess, I voted against it, and that's that Dodd-Frank bill. Did you ever hear of that monster? In that bill, they gave more power to the Federal Reserve. They created a board, a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, protect all the consumers. So they were given a task here a couple of months ago, and it was designed to make things more efficient. That's why this story will tell you why efficiency is not the answer to our problems. We don't want more efficient government. We want to get the government out of the business that they're not supposed to be doing. But this new Consumer Financial Protection Board was given the task of simplifying the applications for a mortgage loan because it's complex. And now they're more complex because they had a bubble and they don't know where the bubble came from because it was probably because they didn't fill out enough forms. So they said, what we need to do is simplify these forms. So they went to work, and indeed, they came up with the solution. They provided the solution. It was 1,000 pages long on how to reduce 2 forms to 1 form. All these new regulations placed on everybody who applies for a bill, and they think that will be the solution. But that isn't the solution. The solution is get the government out of our lives and off our back and out of our wallets. Now, if we are serious, and we are serious, and when we have the clout, what we do is we don't tinker around with 1,000 pages to simplify things. What we do is we repeal Dodd-Frank is what we do. And another, you know, there was another time the Republicans, when they were in charge, they passed the Sarbanes-Oxley. It's cost businessmen $1 trillion with new regulation. But that was when the conservatives were in charge. So when we're getting rid of Dodd-Frank, we get rid of Sarbanes-Oxley as well. I am convinced that we're living at a time that an era is ending. And this is significant because you can be depressed at times when you look at what's happened in Washington. You work hard, you come close to victories, you don't have real victories, and it goes on and on. You say, this is too overwhelming. And Washington is responding too slowly. But the end of an era provides an opportunity. And I'm thinking recently about what era are we talking about? And I would say, first off, in the last 100 years approximately, what about 1913? That was a beginning of an era. That was a beginning of a time where they said, you know, with the income tax and a new foreign policy, we're going to make the world safe for democracy, and we're going to have a war to end all wars, and we're going to have a Federal Reserve that's going to get rid of the business cycle, on and on. We were going to introduce this wonderful era. Well, guess what? That era is not with us anymore. It's over and done with. We're just looking at the last vestiges of a bad program started in 1913. We will eventually get rid of the Federal Reserve. End it. Good idea. Also at approximately that same time, something else was started, and that was the domination or the oncoming of communism, 1917. The Bolsheviks taking over, and communism was a panacea. It was all done with good intentions to take care of the people, all those wonderful promises. Well, communism lasted 74 years. It dissipated between 1989 and 1991. People don't talk too much about communism anymore. At the same time, communism brought about is hard to count when it gets up into the hundreds of millions. It is estimated that possibly 200 million people died by people who were able to put bad ideas out on the table and look at the tragedy of what happened. That era is over and done with. We are not going to see the world go back to that type of a program again. One of the books that impressed me when I was still in medical school was Dr. Zhivago. And I remember one line in there when Laura was talking to Zhivago, and things were very, very bad during the revolution. And she says to Zhivago, "What a terrible time to be alive." And she was absolutely right, anticipating just what was coming. But I think things are different now. I don't think we should be as depressed. We have more knowledge now than ever before. We also had the 1930s, a continuation of the progressive era. We had the Keynesian economic policies take over, the New Deal policies taken over, the fascism of Hitler and Mussolini. And they contributed to another 25 million people that died, just the fascism of Europe. So the 1930s didn't do as well either. And then that, of course, when you have bad economic policy, when you get involved in a war to end wars, it's only a war to begin more wars, and you end up in another world war, we end up, again, another World War II, and then after World War II, we have this internationalism come in. We have the development of the United Nations and the IMF and the World Bank. But they set up, of course, they were working toward worldwide currency, so they set up this Bretton Woods agreement on money, which was a total farce. The good economists, the Austrian economists at that time said, it can't work, it won't work. And indeed, when it fell apart, it was a very, very impressive day for me, because like it is tonight, a Sunday evening, it was on a Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971, the Bretton Woods monetary system collapsed. But that was predictable, and that's over with. And there are some, there's no doubt, would like to go back to that. But it also gives us the wonderful opportunity to advance forward. In more recent history, we have had the advancement of these failed policy. The Project for a New American Century. That is you already know there are a bunch of neocons running that show. They actually opened up an office in 1997. They closed their office in 2006. That doesn't mean they're gone, and that doesn't mean they're not influencing most of the politicians in Washington, but believe me, they're losing steam. Right now, the wars that have been fought in these 10 last years has given us $4 trillion worth of debt, are unpopular, we can't afford them, the American people want us out, and they want to bring the troops home. If they don't listen to your shouts, and if they don't listen to common sense, they're going to listen to the facts of life. And the facts of life is we can't afford it anymore. The Soviets didn't leave because they had an enlightenment. They left because they were broke. And they so foolishly got bogged down in Afghanistan. So why don't we wise up and just take care of ourselves and defend our country and not be the policemen of the world? These conditions that have been developing for the past 100 years, and now we're in the midst of a change, providing an opportunity for a revolution towards liberty. This has provided some very serious problems for us. It will not be smooth sailing, but there's reason to be optimistic that we can have great achievement. But to me, the three problems that we have to face, number one, that I see as the problem, that if we solved it, it probably would solve most of the other ones. And that is the attack on personal liberty. If people truly understood what personal liberty means, that you have self-ownership, that you have a natural God-given right to your life, therefore you have a right to your liberty, and we defend all life and all liberty regardless of our judgment about how people are using that liberty, then we would have the natural sequence of saying, if that is the case, you have a natural right to keep the fruits of your labor, and all of it. Personal liberty, when it returns, once again, you'll be able to drink raw milk. You'll be able to make rope out of hemp. You will be able to feel secure in your houses, that the federal government will not be able to spy on you or bust into your house without a search warrant. You will be allowed, without a government permit, to buy nutritional products when you please and what you please. No longer will government assume they have the responsibility of protecting you against yourself. Nobody can do that. The emphasis will no longer be on economic and personal security. The government will take care of us, but it will be emphasizing the government is there to protect our liberty. You know, they can give us security, you know, whether it's economic, which always fails, or whether it's personal security. But you will become, if the government said we can provide you perfect security, isn't that what we do with animals that we breed to raise up and eat? I mean, this is what happens. They're secure. You put them in cages, or you put them in fields, you fatten them up, you take care of them. They have all the food they want and the best nutrition until it's time to butcher. And this is safe. So what you want is liberty. You don't want this false sense of security that governments cannot give you. Now, it is true, in a free society, you can pick your nutritional products, and you can make your own choices, and you can drink raw milk. But you also, in a free society, you're allowed to make even more controversial choices. You might even decide to drink alcohol. And you know, there's a little bit of risk in alcohol, but in a truly free society, they tried that alcohol business one time. It didn't work very well. Too many politicians drank alcohol, so they finally repealed that. But yes, you would be allowed to make a decision on what kind of, what things you smoke and drink or eat or whatever you do to your own body. Now, of course, the argument is what would happen to the world if they had freedom of choice to imbibe drugs and all these dangerous things? Well, why don't you go back and look at early American history up until about 1938 and find out how many people were using these drugs in the 19th century. So once again, it's who gets to make these decisions. But the hardest thing for some people to accept, both liberals and conservatives, on this issue of tolerance of your freedom. Yes, we want you to have your freedom. We want you to make your own choices, and we're not going to tell you that you can't make bad choices. People say, well, doesn't that mean you endorse it? What if people drink too much or smoke too much into making their own choices? Well, there's one rule. They have to assume the consequences of their actions totally and completely. But it is under the pretense of taking care of ourselves that we have this drug war. Our government agencies have been known to be involved in drug trades. Government agents have been involved. The law enforcement agencies have been involved. And guess what? Guess which industry would like to see marijuana never legalized? That's the alcohol industry. How about the drug companies that sell all these tranquilizers? They don't want marijuana legalized either. So there's a lot of special interests that would like to keep drugs illegal. But the attack then is on our liberties. That is the important thing. We want our freedoms to make these decisions even when the wrong decisions are made. Now, and there's still some people say, well, no, if it's legal, that means we've endorsed it. No, we don't. We don't endorse it. What about on religion? We're pretty good on religious values. Some people choose no religion. Some people pick different ones, 10, 20, 30, 50 different kind of religions. But we generally protect that and say that's your own choice. You can make your own choice. We are not judgmental about that. And we're pretty good, but we're getting, we're getting sloppy on it to protect your intellectual freedoms. Now that they want to regulate the internet and arrest people for saying things, this is where we're going to have to be very careful, because when the state feels like they're under attack, probably the first freedom they get rid of is freedom of speech. Ideas, spreading ideas. That is why our ideological revolution has to pursue, and it has to pursue quickly before they take away our ability to communicate. But it's the ideas that changes the world, so that is why the First Amendment is so crucially important. In the second area that we have a great deal to be concerned about, and that is economics. We're in an economic mess. It's very, very bad. I am convinced it's worse than anything that we faced. Worse than the Great Depression. Worse than when we're in major wars. Because the fundamentals, the foundation of our economic system, the understanding of property rights, the understanding of monetary policy, has so eroded that the bubble that still exists is so huge, and it's worldwide. So when we see hints of this breaking apart, in Europe, or what's going to happen, to the euro and the European community, and what's going to happen to us. Well, generally so far, with our Federal Reserve and our Treasury, and so far our Congress, it says, well, we better be in Europe because our bank's over there, and we don't want to let everybody fail, so we have to keep bailing them out. And I would say that eventually is going to bring the downfall of the dollar and the downfall of the economy, which means that there will be more excuses for them to crack the whip and crack down on our civil liberties. This is why understanding civil liberties, individual rights, are so crucial in tying it in to monetary policy and property rights, because we cannot allow that to happen. The economic system today is based on debt. For too long, what we have done is we've bailed out every attempt for the market to correct the mistakes made, especially since 1971. We've always jumped in and interfered. That is, we spent more money, printed more money, lowered the interest rates, and there seemed to always be a response. Even though the statistics now are showing how devastating this economy and destruction of currency is. The average American family's losing. They know it. It's on the news this week, significantly. And that is a predictable event. Austrian economics teaches that if a government deliberately devalues and destroys the value of a currency, it will destroy the middle class, and the wealth will gravitate to the wealthy. That is the reason monetary policy is important, and the reason that ultimately we get rid of the Fed. Some people ask, well, haven't we had a accumulation of wealth in the last several decades? Some people have gotten wealthier, but the average person hasn't. And the middle class is smaller, is especially smaller in these past 5 years. So you print money, and even if they get a GDP to go up, it's represented by the government spending more money on cruise missiles or something. And that doesn't help you. It doesn't help your income. It doesn't help keep prices down. It doesn't help you one bit. And it is so destructive, because when the trouble comes and the Fed say, we are all wise, we know what interest rates should be, we know what the cost of money should be, and therefore we're going to make it free. And guess who qualifies? The big banks. And they get free money and they loan it back to the governments, and they buy the bonds, finance the political system, and they make a lot of money. But what happens to the average person who decides they need to be frugal? Times are tough. Spend less, save more, be prepared, take care of ourselves, act responsibly. Guess what? instead of getting a market rate of interest, which very well could be 5, 6, 7, 8%, they get 1% or nothing. So it is so unfair, and once again, it is biased against the people, protects the big banks, the big corporations, and the politicians. And the other area that we have created a lot of problems for ourselves, but we're in the midst of a transition, and that is on foreign affairs. We're spread too far around the world. We're in 140 countries. We have 900 bases. They're preparing right now to go into Syria, and it probably won't be too long that we may well be in Iran. We don't need another war. We need less wars, and we need to quit. One of the strongest things that we have to deal with, of course, is the foreign policy as a consequence of the tremendous fear about being attacked by a terrorist. Now, terrorism is a serious subject to deal with, and if you understand the blowback mechanism, of course, we think we can do a whole lot to reduce the threat of terrorism. But right now, the threat of any of us being killed by terrorists is about 1 in 25 million. The odds of getting killed by a car is 1 in 19,000. Lightning, 1 in about 5 million. But guess what? If you're in the military and you have to go over and get involved in a shooting battle to save the world for democracy, make the world safe for democracy, and bring peace and tranquility to these countries, guess what? The estimates are, and there's no precise number, but it's somewhere between 2 and 20 per 100 people, like 2% to 20%, that you will be killed by friendly fire. What a tragedy. And they think that we have to have a drone warfare, constant. Every country, anybody who suggests they dislike us will try to send out drone missiles. And guess what? That does not win friends. It does not help us in any way whatsoever. It has been said that they were very pleased that we were over there. It was much easier killing us over there than needing to come over here where the Second Amendment is still alive and well. Now, in talking about foreign policy like this and emphasizing blowback, somebody rather nastily said the other day on the internet, and they said, oh yeah, if those Paul peoples had been in charge, Osama bin Laden would still be alive. But you know what I think the answer is? So would the 3,000 people from 9/11 be alive. And so would the 8,500 Americans who were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. They would be alive as well. And also those 44,000 military personnel who have come back severely injured, they would not be suffering those consequences, and we wouldn't have hundreds of thousands suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome as well as brain injuries. So I would say if you take that and add in $4 trillion, our side wins that argument by a long shot. Of course, if we had our way and we removed these dangers, Of course, a president would not be able to assassinate anybody, especially never an American citizen. Then, of course, if we have our way, we would repeal the provision in the National Defense Authorization Act. This whole idea that they've gone all the way back to 1215, the mess around with the progress of liberty and repeal habeas corpus by saying that you don't have any right of due process and the military can arrest us and put in private prisons and never get a trial. There's something very un-American about that, let me tell you. Now, there was, when that bill was being debated in the Senate, there was a provision in there so that actually it looked like it was going to get passed. The provision said that if we as an American citizen were arrested and we were tried and found innocent in a jury trial, they still claimed that they could put us away forever and held indefinitely in detention after finding it. But it didn't get that bad. It's still bad, but there was a senator, I can't think of his name, I think he was from Kentucky, and he was able to stop that. Once it got out on the table, they said, "Oh, we didn't know that was in there." Of course, that's always possible because they don't have the vaguest idea what they're voting on most of the time. That is a problem, there's a Read the Bills Act over there, and of course I think that's a proper thing to do. You ought to read the bill. But, I have to admit, I haven't read all those bills. I mean, if they're 1,000 pages long, my staff has good instructions. They say they have an easy job. They say all they have to do is show me if it's unconstitutional. So a lot of times they only have to read the first page. And if there was ever a time if I wasn't well informed or I came quickly and thought, well, I maybe haven't thought this through completely, let me tell you, it's always been safe to vote no. I think the important thing that we know in this room and the growing number of Americans are realizing that the worst thing we can do is remain silent. How many times I've been to the campuses, I brought this subject up about military arrests and the problems that we're facing, assassination and torture and all these things. And I said, but how many times have you read it or heard about it on the evening news? I mean, it's almost like there's a silence out there. But early on in the campaign, I would bring up, I'd just sort of say, well, let me tell you a little bit about NDAA, and I would think I had to fully explain it. But as soon as I said NDAA, the people in the audience, they were outraged about it, which means we're not silent. We know about it, but we have to get around the system, which will not report on it, because they're part of the problem. They're part of the military-industrial complex. But another accusation that is made quite frequently at me and you is that we're not patriotic. Well, we do know the military supports this because they say that's un-American, you're not patriotic. But all our views are supposed to be unpatriotic. They hide behind this and patriotism is. But I have been taught and I have been convinced that patriotism is that quality that permits us in a free society to criticize our own government when they're wrong. This is why I have a soft spot in my heart for whistleblowers. The whistleblower serves a very good function, but quite frequently, what are they accused of? Treason. Why are they doing this? Why are they releasing this information? So, Bradley Manning, you know. Now, he's in the military, and there are probably some, debate on exactly how and what to do, but let me tell you, Bradley Manning didn't kill anybody. Bradley Manning hasn't caused the death of anybody. And what he has exposed, he is equivalent to Daniel Ellsberg, who told us the truth about Vietnam. And when Daniel Ellsberg was under the gun, the government wanted to crack down on the exposure on the New York Times. The New York Times, printed the material that Ellsberg released. And that went to the Supreme Court. And Ellsberg did not go to prison. It was upheld, and New York Times did not suffer either, the consequence of this. So we're at this point, but just think right now, I'm afraid that if we took a poll across the country and they say, should we try Assange for treason? But most Americans are going to say, oh yes, he's a bad guy. He's telling us all these secrets. But guess what? He's an Australian citizen. And you read about it all the time. That's trying for treason and bring him to the United States. So we have so much power and clout, even Sweden is submitting to saying, well, if he gets here, we'll drum up some false charges and we'll send him over to the United States so he can have a fair trial. But those are the kind of things, those are the problems that we need to worry about, that we need to be concerned about, but they're also the kind of things that we can reverse, and that should be our goal, to change this, to know what a free society is all about, to know where we are and what we need to do. We don't have to invent it. We've had a good taste of it. We don't have to go back to a static period in the 19th century because there were a lot of problems. Even the gold standard can be improved upon. So we want to advance the cause. I think the cause of individual liberty actually started in 1215. It got a tremendous boost with our revolution and our Constitution. But we don't want to say we're going back. The people who want tyranny, want big government, that's what is ancient, and that is what we should worry about. They're the ones who want to go back to the Dark Ages. So, how do we look at today, 2012? Do we look at it like 1913? Are we starting all over again and bringing in a new system? Is it 1917 with the Sovietization and the communization of the world? Is it the 1930s where we had so much fascism and Keynesianism and all the mess we have, and then the 50s and the advancement, or now are we going to have to live with the neocons? Or are we going to say we're living in a new era? We're going to start something different, completely different than all that. In 1935, Sinclair Lewis wrote a novel, It Can't Happen Here. And that novel essentially was a warning because he believed it could happen here. It was an anti-fascist novel because he was very concerned about Mussolini and the Nazis. And his whole argument was that it can't happen here. But I would like to turn that around and say it can happen here. What can happen here, though, not in the negative sense, there can happen that we can reverse this. If we don't believe it can happen, it won't have a prayer of a chance. We can turn it around if we put the work and effort into it. Some people, will still be negative and they say, yeah, but how many times have you seen a revolution that really has turned out? All through the 20th century, so many revolutions and wars to end wars and all that. It never happened. And right now we still have neocons all over the place. They aren't all in one party either. They're in both of the parties, and that's what we have to be challenged. But there have been times in our history where, in the history of the world, where there has been successes. In 1850, the British passed a law. It was called the Repeal of the Corn Laws. And it was an introduction into free market economics, repealing mercantilism and protectionism, and ushered in the age of the Industrial Revolution. And it was a difficult time. Peel, who was the representative, had this passed. He worked for many, many years, and it was finally passed. And it was smoothly. There were a lot of special interests involved, but it worked. It was smoothly, and they transitioned from mercantilism into a much better system. In 1919, they decided in this country that we were going to take care of the American people to make sure the American people's habits were wise and frugal. And so they passed this prohibition of alcohol. And it was an absurdity. It didn't work. But what happened by the early 1930s? By 1933, the people rose up and said, this is ridiculous. Prohibition is bad. And they repealed prohibition. So someday we're going to wake up and say the same thing about all drugs and right now we're getting a lot more support for this. Repeal these drug laws, get rid of the crime associated with the drug law. In 1933, as Roosevelt took over, he ran believing his program in 1932 was balanced budget. He had the most conservative platform because Hoover wasn't doing such a good job. And he said that he would defend the gold standard and balance the budget and cut spending. Well, that didn't exactly happen because the first thing he did was made it illegal for an American citizen to own gold. I mean, that really told you something about what was happening. But it was illegal to own gold all the way up until 1975. So in 1975, why is gold illegal? And a law was passed, and we moved back in a direction, and the American people could own gold. It's a very important issue. In a free society, don't give up your right to own precious metal, and don't give up your right to own a weapon to defend yourself. But then we even made a little more progress because we had not minted any gold coins since the early 1930s. So in 1985, once again, as a consequence of the Gold Commission, one thing that they came out of that, what we came out with, they would not go along with the views that I had on gold at the time, and they said, well, we'll throw them something, so why don't we go back to minting gold coins again? Far from imperfect, not a gold standard, but it was a big thing. It was a big deal for us to take something minted. It was one of the few constitutional authorities that we have to mint gold and silver coins. So that was restored in 1985. Point being is that it isn't inexorable that we move in the wrong direction. We can start moving in the other direction. And even if you would have asked me 5 years ago that we would have get the attention of the nation and we would have get the attention of the establishment Republicans, even where they felt compelled to talk about it in the platform, that I never dreamed that we would get attention to probably 75% of the American people say the Fed ought to be audited. So what is our big challenge? The big challenge is can we restore natural rights, God-given rights to our people so that we emphasize the fact that return of liberty can solve so many of our problems. Economic policies means private property, contract rights, gold standard, and get the government out of this business of regulating. The market in property rights regulates quite well. Under those conditions, guess what happens in a free market? They say there'll be no regulations. No, the regulation is if you go bankrupt and you don't get bailed out by the government. So the really big question I think that we have to decide upon is which way are we going to go? We see the end of an era. Where is it going to go? And I think the choice is one of two. I do not think that there's going to be another Marxist come along and restore enthusiasm for Marxism. I don't think that tomorrow we're going to have the same thing as a Hitler or Mussolini, but I do think we have to worry about fascism. An expansion of what we already have, which is corporatism. The buddy system between big corporations, big banks with the government. And that is the reason that we have to be on the side of saying, yes, if you're big and you made your money because you had special benefits and bailouts and protectionism from the government, that is wrong. But if you're big because you sold a good product to us and we bought it and you got rich, you have a right to be rich for doing that. We do know that ideas do have consequences, and an idea, as I've often said, as time has come, can't be stopped. I really believe we're here. I think we're here. They're not going to be able to stop us. But we have to learn to know how to spot the fluff, the baloney, and get rid of it. Don't listen to it. But you just can't hit them over the head with a 2x4. It seems like maybe that's the best way to do it at times. You know, some people claim that I have not been, and I don't express my outrage enough. You should be more outraged. Look at what they're doing to you. How did you ever put up with that? What did you do all this? Then they'll say to me, how did you ever put it up with this in Congress 30 years and you're not yelling and screaming? But have you ever thought about it? What if I became outraged at everything they did wrong? I'd have been worn out in about 5 years for sure. But we do need to sort it out. We do need to know the good ideas from the bad ideas. We do need to persuade people. And politics plays a role in this. And I feel very blessed that I was able to be a professional person, practice medicine, which my wife described as something I loved and I did. One of the reasons why I went back to my practice after being in Washington for 6-7 years. And politics is something that is beneficial if I had not run for Congress. And I consider there's a lot of luck in politics and winning a seat. And I don't think there's any luck in taking your positions. I think that is a freedom of choice and you make those decisions. So, but anyways, being in the right place in the right time has a lot to do with it. But I think every one of us has a responsibility because people in an audience like this know and understand the problem. You have more insight than essentially almost everybody in Washington. And I guess that's no challenge. But the difficult task is you have more responsibility. And you say, and a lot of people say, well, and even in the introductions today, they talk about sacrifice. I don't think for a minute I sacrifice anything. I do it out of self-interest. I do it because I think it's good for me. I do it because, well, I enjoy ideas. I enjoy sorting out right from wrong, good ideas and bad ideas. And there's some fun in it. I always advise if you're in this business and you don't try to have some fun, like I hope we do the rest of the evening tonight too, to have some fun, then you're going to get worn out. But once you come to the conclusion that you put this whole thing together, personal liberty, property rights, sound foreign policy, monetary policy, and then there's an enlightenment. It comes and a light goes on and you say, wow, this really comes together. So out of your own self-interest, you spread this message, but you first educate yourself, study and learn, and learn how to give the answers. And you don't have to worry about what your job is going to be. If you know the answers and you speak out and you're available, somebody will use you. And it may be in politics. You may run for office. You may organize. Who knows what it'll be? But the obligation is there. You have an obligation to do your very best to change this, because it's in your interest, in your family's interest, it's the interest of our country. When we do this, we have to aim high. We have to be very idealistic. We have to use reason, and we have to have passion. We have to have passion for this. This will convert people rather than grabbing them by the collar and saying, don't you understand what I'm saying? Listen to me. It doesn't work, I'll tell you that. It just doesn't work. A soft answer sometimes is a lot better. A soft answer in Washington doesn't seem to help too much, but when you're persuading your friends, soft answers and discussion is a good way to convince people. This whole idea of describing it as a one unit, that you don't have economic freedom and personal liberty and they're separate, no, it's all one issue. And also, if they get very confused and they say, well, I don't quite understand that, just tell them freedom is popular. That's the reason. And the basic rule that drives this whole philosophy is the rejection of violence. You don't kill other people. You don't take their property. You tolerate other people. And just think about this for a minute. Freedom should bring us together. It should never be divisive. Because in this room, there might be 1,000 different reasons why you want your freedom. You might want it for personal reasons, economic reasons, religious reasons, intellectual reasons. But if you all agree on liberty, you don't have to worry what the other guy's doing, the other person, or how they dress, or what they say, or what they do. We all should come together to defend liberty. Giving up this initiation of force or violence is very important. I mean, we live with a lot of violence, state violence, police violence, individual violence, and we're in a very violent culture. And I think it's a result, and this is my own theory, I think it comes from the fact that welfareism and socialism doesn't generate a sense of self-esteem. And it generates... Instead of generating an understanding and enjoyment of liberty, it generates this idea that somebody owes me something. And this is very negative. And then I think self-esteem comes from production, where you feel good about yourself, that you did something. Now, some people can produce computers. There can be a Steve Jobs. I couldn't possibly be a Steve Jobs, but I bet his satisfaction came as much from producing things as it was for just getting another $1 billion. You know, I don't think that's it. It is self-esteem and confidence. But everybody's self-esteem and confidence from producing comes differently. It might be raising a family. It might be doing your job well. You know, you're doing your job well. Various ways. But the self-esteem, to me, seems to be so important. I am convinced that when people lose their self-esteem, they're more likely to do violence to others because they don't even have enough respect for themselves. So injuring others doesn't matter. And maybe those who redistribute wealth suffer from that same problem. Oh yeah, superficially they want to redistribute wealth and take care of everybody, but they too might not have enough self-esteem to understand where it really comes from. My personal goal with my politics and my personal life is that a free society provides me an opportunity to seek virtue and excellence. And that should be a personal goal. And in doing that, it is better done in a free society. If the government takes over the rule of trying to make you a better person, an excellent person, and make you virtuous, it's all over. It's all over. That is the seeds of an authoritarian society. So instead of seeing this as a continuation of an era of the 20th century that gave us so much death and destruction and undermining of our liberties and conditions today that are so dangerous, let us think that we are now moving into a new era where we're going to concentrate on liberty and freedom and property and peace. I believe that is the cause that we should lead, and I thank you very much for being part of it. Thank you. Thank you.
If you want to have the last wave, the motorcade will be leaving on Elm Street. For those of you who've been part of those sign waving goodbye and hello to the Ron Paul family, they'll be leaving on Elm Street if you wanted to line up there and say goodbye. And for the delegates, please, all the delegates, you can go right to where the buses dropped you off, and the buses will pick you up and take you to Whiskey Joe's. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are the future. You're welcome.